Morning. We're really pleased today to have Bill Quinlan, who is retired from Channel 20, right, as a meteorologist. And we're looking forward to him telling us what to expect for climate in the future. Since we're on Zoom, just raise your hand and I'll need to bring the mic to you because otherwise, Zoom audience will be able to hear what you have to say. And of course, Bill has his own mic. So we'll get started.
All right, as everybody takes a seat, thank you for letting me come out and give a chat about the climate. Now, I do not work for the county, so just to let you know, they asked me to do a summary of their vulnerability report back, I think it was last October. And so we're just going to kind of use that information for today. Most of the information here was put together by Jones Edmonds, and it's using information generally from 2022 back. So it doesn't include the last 2 years because it takes such a long time to put something like this together and then get it through the county and then get it finalized. I think the actual final report is not going to be issued until sometime this summer, either June or July, but don't hold me on that. But this is about how the climate is going to affect Alachua County. And you're going to be very surprised and hopefully a little bit scared. A lot of times people don't want to discuss climate because it becomes too much of a political issue instead of a science issue. I'm just going to talk about the science. We're not going to have a discussion about political implications or anything like that. But the climate is something we have to talk about and take seriously because it's going to affect us down the future. Now, a lot of us are getting older, so we're thinking, 30 years down the line, how is that going to affect us? Well, how about 50, 100 years down the line? All of our kids and grandchildren are going to have to deal with this and the implications of either doing something about it or not doing something about it. So let's start out with climate versus weather. What's the difference? A lot of people think, well, the weather is the same thing as the climate. That is not the case. There's actually a definition. Weather is the current state of the atmosphere, including temperature, wind, pressure, clouds, and precipitation. So the weather you have outside right now is the weather. But the climate is the expected frequency of the atmosphere over a period of time. So what the weather is going to be like over a longer period. And Mark Twain put it this way: climate is what you want because of the averages, but weather is what you get. So keep that in mind. One thing to think about when you think of the difference between climate and weather, weather is what you're wearing today. Climate is what the clothes are in your closet because you have to dress for different times of the year. So you can think of what your climate in whatever area you're living at. Now here in Florida, a lot of us have shorts and short sleeve shirts and don't have a lot of winter coats, maybe one. Now, if you live farther north, maybe Georgia, even Alabama, and then back into other areas of the Southeast, or of course the Northeast where I'm from, Boston, you have a lot of winter coats. You have big boots you have to wear out in the snow. Luckily, we don't have to deal with that, and hopefully no time soon. But the opposite effect of that is that we could possibly be warmer down the line, and not just a little bit warmer. We're not talking 1 or 2 degrees. We're talking 5, 6, maybe 8 degrees warmer down in the future. So here are the climate threats: extreme heat, heavy rainfall, sea level rise. And you can see how this propagates through this, how it affects different things. So the vulnerabilities are hotter days and nights, longer droughts, increasing flooding, enhanced wildfire, and climate mitigation. And that leads to all sorts of things with decline in health, decline in water, everything's decline, reduced food and economic decline because of the impacts of the weather. People don't really understand that weather has a lot to do with everything that happens to us down the line. So, how does weather actually happen? Well, the sun produces the weather. The sun heats the air, heats the ground. All of that energy either goes back up into space or stays near the ground, depending on how things are progressing during the day, whether you have more clouds, less clouds. Clouds only keep about 10% of the radiation from reaching the ground. So a lot of people say, oh, it's a cloudy day, I don't need to put on sunscreen. That's not the case. If you go outside on a cloudy day and you're outside without any kind of sunscreen on, you're still going to get a sunburn, especially from this time of year on. I remember back when I first started here at TV20, I was doing a promotional shoot in, I think it was in March. It was like the middle of March, and it was a beautiful day, kind of like today, where it's maybe 70, 75 degrees. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. And we were outside in the morning for about 10 o'clock to noon, just taking shots, and we were giving away a car or something they were doing later in the year. And so we're posing in the car and making little kind of faces and things. And I had to do the weather that night. So I went home, took a shower, came back in the afternoon. I didn't need any makeup in the afternoon because I was so sunburned. I was so red for like 3 days. I'm like, okay, I have to remember this is Florida sun. The angle's a little bit stronger. I have to worry about that. So now the components of the climate. So you take the solar input and how it impacts the earth here. So it warms up the water, warms up the land, all of these changes in the atmosphere by producing moisture and heat that goes back up into the atmosphere. And the impacts of these can actually change anywhere from the hydrosphere, which is the ocean, rivers and lakes, changes in land surface. So if we cut down all of our trees and don't replace them, we're going to have problems because it reduces the Earth's ability to absorb some of that energy and pushes it back into the atmosphere. You see, volcanic activity actually is a big problem. From some years in the past, we've had huge volcanic events that have blocked out the sun, and that can actually cause major issues with cooling as opposed to warming because there's too much debris in the atmosphere. So a lot of that sun's energy gets reflected back up into space instead of coming through. Unlike clouds, the volcanic ash does not absorb the energy, it reflects it back into space, so that can cause some cooling. One interesting thing that happened back in 9/11 is when we stopped all of the plane flights. When all the plane flights stopped for several weeks, the Earth actually started to warm up because of all of the, people talk about chemtrails. That is not a thing. It's a condensation trail. The condensation trail you see that are going across the sky, that's the exhaust from the planes. Now there's particulate matter in that, just like your cars putting out fumes when you're driving down the road. What happens is with all of those planes gone, that reflectivity of the sun's energy back up into space disappeared. The sky was too clear. So all of that energy was coming back towards the Earth, causing more warming. So we actually had a little bit of a warming trend at that point when all those planes were not flying. And that's just over several weeks. Now, when we factor in the amount of energy that's coming from the sun, and then we add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, that causes more problems because it absorbs that heat. And then we get more of that, what we used to call global warming. The reason we call it climate change instead of global warming is because it's not just a warming trend. It can cause some cooling trends, kind of like what we had this winter. It was very cold this winter. The reason it was cold this winter is because of this thing called the polar vortex. You hear about all the time up in the northern hemisphere over the North Pole. That's an area of low pressure that spins around semi-permanently there. What happens is during an area of warming, you have to think about warming in respect of how cold it's supposed to be. The northern hemisphere, North Pole, has been 10 to 15 to 20 degrees warmer than it would normally be. So that disrupts that circulation around the pole and creates these lobs or troughs that come around. So those troughs dive in all that cold air from time to time. So global warming, climate change is actually causing it to be colder here at times, but then it warms up quickly as well. So in December, I know it seemed cold in December here, but we were only about a third of a degree below average for the month. January, however, we were about 6 degrees colder than average. But February, which is still winter time, we were 10 degrees above average. Think of all the warm days we had in February. we were up, 78, 80 degrees for a number of days in a row, and that just flips it on its head the other way. So the problem is, are we going to have another record-breaking year? We're going to get to some of that here in a minute. But the amount of heat that potentially is coming for this year could be record-breaking. We'll see if that actually happens. So here's a look at the daily temperatures. Now, this is from 2023, so this is not included in the study that was presented by for Alachua County, but I just wanted to give you a hint of what happened in 2023 and 2024. So 2023, the red up here is the record highs. The lighter blue is the record lows, and the darker blue is the actual temperature change throughout the year, daily highs and daily lows. You can see how it goes back and forth. And this line here is the average temperature that you would normally see. So you can see there were a lot of lines that were above and below that for the average for the year. This is just 2023, and those are the record highs up top, record lows down the bottom. These are the record highs we had in 2023. We're looking now, we're not talking 110 or 120 degrees, but we're talking temperatures in January in the mid 80s, in February near 90. As we get back into areas of July and August, you say, well, it's supposed to be hot, but it's not supposed to be over 100 degrees or close to 100 degrees. Average temperature usually is about 90 or 91 degrees. Or 89 degrees. And so we're exceeding those. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4 record highs in 2023. I don't have the information for 2024, but worldwide, we broke more records in 2024. So here's something that I came across from The Guardian, and global surface temperatures. This is the average global surface temperatures. So even though this is a degree C or Celsius, gets out to about 17 degrees C. So that's, you think, well, that's not that hot. But this is the average, highs and lows for the entire globe. 2023 was the hottest year ever on record until last year, 2024. That jumped it up at least another 1 to 2 degrees. 2025 is expected to exceed that. Will it come true? To give it a sense of perspective, every computer model that they've used, climate model, has been wrong on the low side. Not on the high side. It's been wrong as far as the low side. It's been undercutting how warm it's going to be. So new models are coming on all the time. Hopefully they'll get a little bit more accurate, but you're talking about a long-term solution here. When we do the weather, or when I used to do the weather, anything outside of 3 days, it's kind of a guess. It's an educated guess, but take it with a grain of salt. Think about what they're trying to do. The climate scientists are trying to do things out 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years in the future. It's a bit of a guessing game, but it's very scientifically accurate from their point of view. Here's another thing, 2024, monthly records broken. 65% of the Earth's surface had at least one monthly record broken in that time. This is also from The Guardian, the study that they did. So think about that. How much area of the Earth? So we're talking oceans, landmass, everything. 65%, 2/3 of the Earth experienced above average temperatures and broke records. That's from The Guardian. It's information that they put together from a bunch of different other climate sources. They're a very good source for information, for news and for weather information as well. So when we get to back to Alachua County, you can see our baseline is for average annual temperatures, 60 for the low, 83 for the high. So that's, like I said, climate is what you want, but weather is what you get. You get a big change. And you see that's the deviation there's from year to year. That's what that little line is on the top of the graph. So by 2030, you're expected to maybe jump up half a degree, maybe 1 degree for the low. Then it starts to climb from there. 2040 up to 84, 2070, 87, 2100, 89 for the average high temperature for the year. Who can tell me a place on Earth that has an average temperature of that's somewhat close to us? Anybody know? Puerto Rico as an average, because they don't cool off very much at night because the water temperature keeps them warm. Water temperatures drop down. I mean, the air temperatures may be dropping into the mid upper 70s, but their average daily high is closer to 90 degrees. That's what they have currently. So think about it. We live here in North Central Florida. In less than 75 years, we could be like Puerto Rico as far as the heat and humidity goes. Is that going to change the way people act? Is that going to change the way people interact? Is that going to change the way we live? How much energy we're going to have to use? It's something I don't really want to think about that much. All right, annual minimum and maximum temperatures. So this is the baseline now. 27.4 is the annual minimum temperature. So that's the actual bottom. That's how cold it generally could get. And this year we were 32 degrees or lower from December through February. I think it was about 18 times. I haven't checked the complete data for February yet. And normally we're only about 6. So we changed that a lot for the low temperature, but we weren't down to 20, I think we got down to 27, I think once. So that's pretty average, but 101 for the maximum temperature, yeah, occasionally we'll break 100 degrees, maybe once a year, but it's not the heat, it's the humidity, right? That's what you're gonna worry about. But look at the change here. So we go from 101 up to 110 for the maximum temperature during the year by 2100. So 75 years. So not too bad until we get to 2040. We're up to about 103, then 106 in 2070, and 110 by 2100. But also the daytime low, look what happens to the freezing temperatures. They disappear. We actually need freezing temperatures. It's important to have freezing temperatures to control a lot of things. Right, so the average annual number of freezes goes from, you can see that wide range there. That's the standard deviation from 1 all the way up to about 12. But the average is about 6.5 number of days that we have now for freezes. Like I said, we had almost 18 freezes this year. So you can see that widespread, that can change. But then by 2030, it goes down to the average of 4, then 40, and then we get down to less than 1 in 2070, and then almost no freezes by 2100. So not only are we increasing the daytime highs, we're eliminating the freezing temperatures, which helps control a lot of pest populations and funguses for your plants and all sorts of things. You need that change in temperatures to make a healthy environment, especially in the climate where we live. So lack of freeze impacts, potential increase in tropical disease. So all those diseases you have in South America or the Caribbean or South Florida are going to start climbing up the state. You got EEE, Eastern equine encephalitis. We already have that, more prevalent in Marion County than it is here, but we have populations of chickens that are tested all the time to make sure that's not going to be a problem. You'll get information from the health service every once in a while saying, oh, we've had a case of EEE. Be aware, don't go out at certain times of the day or night because the mosquitoes could carry that West Nile virus, something we don't want to see. Malaria, dengue fever, all those kind of things could be moving up into this area over the next 50 to 75 years. Pythons, well, hopefully they can stay south. So the average number of extreme heat and freezing events over a period of time, this is kind of going over the graphical version of that stuff we just showed you here. Oh, I think I skipped over that. I was supposed to go through a bunch of different slides here, but it just shows you how we go from the baseline where we have long periods of freezing events 3 down to 0 by 2100. But the problem is number of warm nights. So warm nights above 80 degrees. You know, generally in summertime, we're looking at 72, maybe 74, and how uncomfortable it is when the power goes out during a hurricane and you have to have your windows open and you're just sitting there like, oh, is it ever going to cool off? Well, think about that. We generally don't have anything close. We didn't even have, in the record temperatures we had last year, we did not have a night above 80 degrees. 79 is the warmest a night got. But 17, 73. Think about 73. That's an entire summer worth of nights above 80 degrees. Think of how much that's going to impact your electricity bill or your power bill or whatever you use to cool your home during the summer to make it livable here. I just put solar panels on my roof, so hopefully that won't be a problem for me. All right, so let's talk about the heat index. Heat index, everybody talks about that all the time. That's the calculation for heat index. So it's not just a number we pull out of the air. And unlike a wind chill actually only affects the surface of your skin. A heat index affects your whole body because you can't cool yourself off. Your body gets to a point, if the heat index gets above 105 degrees, your body can't cool itself any longer. So if you go outside and you start sweating, usually the sweat is a mechanism to help your body cool itself off because the wind goes along and creates this effect on your skin to help cool your skin off, which translates into cooler temperature in your body by cooling your blood. Well, once you get above 105 outside for the heat index, that doesn't occur anymore. So you see people dropping from heat stroke or heat index problems. That's because they're dehydrated or their body temperature rises to a point where they can't sustain themselves any longer. That's why you have to be extra careful in the summertime. So caution, 80 to 90 degrees, fatigue possible. Danger is heat cramps, heat exhaustion likely, heat stroke possible, and heat stroke likely when you get 120 or higher, 125 or higher. Luckily, we don't have that much of a problem as of yet. Here's a little graph to show from the National Weather Service about what we usually expect during the summertime here. You can see it goes from 95 to about 108. Now, occasionally we'll get a heat index, maybe 110, closer to 115, but it's for a very short period of time in the later afternoon. It's not at noontime. You have to remember there's that delay in temperature, that even though the sun may be right overhead at noon, the sun actually heats the ground heats the air, and then you get warm. So there's that delay of several hours during the afternoon where the warmest temperature doesn't usually occur until about 3, 4, or 5 o'clock. And then as the angle of the sun changes, that heat dissipates and then you cool off slowly. Well, you cool off slower in the afternoon, unless you have rain, then you warm up in the morning. So you may, like at 7 o'clock, it may be the coolest temperature, maybe in the summer, 70, 72. But by 9 o'clock, it's already about 85. So you warm up a lot quicker in the morning than you cool off in the evening. So this is what the potential is by heat index of 2100. So 75 years down the line, remember we talked about heat stroke is likely? Every single one of those is a heat stroke. How are you going to survive in a world where you can't go outside and you have to stay in your air-conditioned house? So here's the heat index by days. So very hot. Now we're looking at 71, heat index 105. We might get to 115 at the most. Extremely high, 130. Now, last year we had a couple of heat indices. I think they're above 120. And I remember how awful those were during the afternoon. By the time we increase this all the way from 2040, we could have as many as 105 days. So that's an entire summer of a heat index above 105 with extreme events over 6, but then you jump up to about 105 to 61 by the time we get to 2100. One of the things that the county is doing, they have these cooling centers, and they're probably going to have to expand this availability of cooling centers. The little yellow dots there, those are cooling centers. Mostly it's schools, gymnasiums, those kind of things, and churches that allow people to come in and help cool off. They may have a chair set up for people to get out of the heat. Those are going to have to expand. The vulnerability, of course, is mostly in the urban areas. So Gainesville, back over to Alachua, down to Micanopy, Hawthorne, not as much of a problem, but they have cooling centers there too. So you have to remember that this is going to have to expand. The county, as far as they are concerned, are going to have to put more money into resources to help people deal with this heat and humidity down the line. But there's also agricultural impacts. How is it going to affect your food source? Increasing temperatures, warmer highs, and warmer lows. Remember, we don't have those freezing events, so what happens to all those pests that impact all of the animals, all the flies? They're around all year long, causing more and more problems, spreading more disease, and it reduces food availability. So the human heat index, what we just talked about here, is on the left. On the right is what we call the dairy cow temperature humidity index. It's kind of a heat index for cows. It has a big difference for cows as opposed to us, because what happens is the milk loss per day. Now, average milk for a cow is about 5.5 pounds a day, 5.5 to 6 pounds a day. So if you lose 2.5 pounds a day when your heat index gets higher than 69 to 71 for the humidity index that they calculate for cows, you're going to lose almost half your milk production for a cow. You can't stay in business if you're losing half your production of anything anytime soon. By the time you get up to the higher section here, you get the humidity index above 76 to 77, you're looking at milk loss, almost 100% milk loss of 6 pounds per day, 8 pounds, almost 9 pounds per day when you get into the higher areas, and then total milk loss when you get down into the humidity index there of over 90. That is going to cause a devastating impact on just the dairy farmers. You think of chickens and pigs and goats, other animals that people use for producing things, they're going to have just as many problems. So the other thing we need to talk about is rainfall. Rainfall is one of those things that can be is variable, and climate hasn't really climate scientists haven't really put their finger on it yet as far as how much rain is going to be from a particular event over a long period of time. Will we have more hurricanes or less hurricanes? The hurricanes we have, will they be stronger with more rain, or will they be weaker with more rain? There's a lot of information that still needs to be put into that, and they're working on it now. But one thing you have to remember is this: we all learned this in middle school. Remember the water cycle when you talked about how the earth heats, the sun heats the earth creates evaporation from and transpiration from plants, gets up in the atmosphere, creates clouds, and then deposits as precipitation. So whether it's rain or snow, it has the same type of cycle. But the problem is, with increasing temperatures, you increase the amount of moisture in the atmosphere. So as the oceans warm, that moisture gets up in the atmosphere, which can lead to stronger hurricanes, more rainfall within hurricanes, and also more just rain events. Cold fronts coming through with more moisture out ahead of them can create more 3 to 5 inch rainfalls as opposed to maybe a 1 or 2 inch rainfall event. So here's a look in 2023 and several different. So 2023 here for the rainfall for the Gainesville Region Airport. See, it was pretty average starting out the year. That's the line in green. As we get up back towards June, it jumps up because of the rainy season. And then, of course, with tropical systems, it kept increasing. Now, the average line here is the brown line. But you'll also notice the highest is over 70 inches of rain we had in 2017. In 2011, we had the lowest average, but we had a much greater amount of rainfall there in the spring. So you can see how variable it is. So even if you have an above average year, total was 71 inches, we actually started out with an extreme drought. So you can have both scenarios in the same year, where you can have a drought to start out the year, but then you have flooding at the end of the year because you've exceeded your rainfall potential. That is because of climate change. And just because you're starting out dry, it's like, what happened to climate change? What happened to all the rain? Well, you have a drought situation. A drought situation is very important to know because it creates more fire danger. So days without rain, consecutive days without rain, baseline generally is about 18. Then we go to 19, 2040, 18.3. You can see how it varies quite a bit just from the climate models, and then up to 21.3. Now you'd say that's only a 3-day difference. How much can that mean? That can mean life and death between some animals and other animals. It can mean losing an entire crop, or having too much rain can mean flooding the crop. So this is KBDI is essentially a drought index. How is that lack of rainfall going to cause a problem with drought? You can see the baseline. Look at the variability in the baseline here, which is we're looking at this number 5,500 or 550. That's generally what we'll have here in the summertime if we don't get a lot of, or into late spring before the summer rains come in. We get into our fire season in April through the end of May or June. It keeps going up and up and up. So you can see the variability gets much less as we get to 2100. So we're looking at a threat index above 700. That is extremely dangerous. You remember back in 2008 when we had fires that were trying to burn down Waldo? That was one of those years when we were in that 700 to 750 drought index. We had rain in the wintertime, a lot of rain in the wintertime, which causes excessive growth. And then I think it was from beginning of March until the middle of June, we had virtually no rain. We had a few cold fronts come through, but not enough, and everything dried out. So that fuel was just sitting there waiting for some kind of a fire event to happen. So that's what we have to worry about with the drought index. So the impacts of drought, reduced agricultural production, decrease in local plants, increase in sinkholes. What happens when you have a drought? Your aquifer, where we get all of our water from, gets pulled down. What happens when we pull down the aquifer? There's a hole. What happens with that? Now we get a rain event with that hole there. All of that weight from the rain pushes that, and you create the sinkholes like we had over off of 43rd just a couple of years ago. Increase in wildfires, and then of course you have restrictions on water usage, which we should all take care of. And even if there aren't water restrictions, you should be aware of how much water you're using all the time. So here's the average precipitation monthly at Gainesville Region Airport from 2000 to 2024. I made this graph just so you can see where we get our rainfall, how the rainfall actually shows up. Now, a lot of people say, well, we get all of our rain in the summer because of the tropics. Well, not really. We very rarely have tropical systems in June, but June is actually the time when we get most of our rain. The average is about almost 50 inches of rain per year. We have dry spots here, January and February, and October through December. Now, remember, the tropical season runs through the end of November, so you would expect to see a spike here in October and November if it had that much of an impact. Most of the impact is for the afternoon rains, the summer rainy season. You notice it doesn't really start mostly until the end of May. Sometimes we'll get it started early, maybe in the middle of May. We might start to get more sea breeze thunderstorms kicking in, but generally it's June, July, and August when we get most of our rainfall. The peak of hurricane season isn't until August, September, and October, which sure, we still have some, but the rainy season is in the summer, the drier is in the fall, in the winter. So the variable wet season, you can see this changes quite a bit here, actually. So the wet season in inches, we go from, so the summertime, we go from 30 inches to 38 to 32 to 31. Computer model is not doing a great job with this. So that's what I said at the beginning. Are we going to have more rain from this or less rain? Well, it's still a little hard to tell. So we go to the dry season. The dry season actually gets worse. We go from 22 inches in the dry season to 25 inches. But the percentage changes actually goes to 8% to 7%. So that's a drop of 7 to 8%. So something we have to worry about down the line, because wetter winters increase the biofuel growth. Like I talked about for the Waldo fires, we had all that winter rain that caused all the growth, and then we had the biofuels, and that created that threat. Longer spring droughts, rise in wildfire threat continues. So let's talk about flooding. So we talked about how there's variability in the rainfall events. So this is short-term high volume rain events. So getting a rain event with 10 to 20 inches of rain with a tropical system, which 50 years ago, maybe a tropical system would bring 5 to 10 inches of rain. Now they can bring up to 20 to 25 inches of rain. So in a short term, over 3 or 4 days, you get that kind of a rain event. It can cause a lot of problems with flooding along the Santa Fe River, which will affect our county, or along the Swanee River. If it floods in the Swanee River, there's a big rainfall event up in Georgia. That rainfall creates more flow through the Swanee River. More flow through the Swanee River causes the Santa Fe River to back up because it can't flow out into the Swanee River, which means more flooding on the Santa Fe River, even though we may not have had a rainfall event here. So you have to think about how everything is connected around here from one point to another. So where do we get most of our rainfall? Well, Generally, it's because of, in the dry season, it's because of fronts, cold fronts, warm fronts, stationary fronts, or occluded fronts. You can see everybody knows what a cold front is. Cold front comes through, you get a bunch of thunderstorms, and it cools off afterwards. A warm front, it actually warms up. A lot of times you'll see the temperature warm up overnight, like a warm front will come through in the overnight. So instead of cooling off in the overnight, the temperature can actually rise. So instead of going from 65 to 60 in the summertime or the late spring, it may go from 65 to near 70 in the overnight. And then we have a stationary front. That's when the two fronts come together and they create a boundary layer that just sits there. You'll see them on the weather maps all the time. That's that concentration where you can get a lot of rainfall in a short period of time, and even some severe weather events can happen there. And then the occluded front don't happen all that often here. It's when everything kind of comes together and stalls out. They're usually on the northern side of a weather system. So folks in the Midwest and Northeast will see occluded fronts. It's very rare to get those here, but that's where you get generally your rainfall events from. And of course, the sea breeze thunderstorms in the wet season in the summertime, you can get 3 to 5 inches. How many people? I remember when I first moved here back in 1996, the first time I experienced a summertime rain scared the life out of me. Because I went out, I'm like, how can it rain this? I couldn't see the end of my driveway. And there was no wind with this. It was just this straight raindrops as big as your thumb coming down. And all it's doing is drenching everything. But then I go outside an hour later and it's completely dry and the sun's out and you're dripping from the humidity. And of course, tropical systems now, we're looking at 10 to 20 inches of rainfall with tropical events. And we've had an increase in tropical events here over the last several years. Is that trend going to continue? We'll have to wait and see. Hopefully not, but that could also be an impact. So the problem with flooding around the rest of the county is you have these areas here, Zone A, Zone A to E, or Zone A to O. Not really important. Each one is widespread area, moderate area, and Santa Fe River and streams and creeks. So those are more dangerous spots because you can get this flash flooding events. But these are areas we have to worry about as far as the flooding. This is put together by the county, and you can see a lot of these areas in red. Those are wildlife areas, which can absorb all of that. But when you build into a wildlife area or you remove some mitigation parts where you have flooding controls, that can cause some problems. You build a parking lot, what's going to happen with that? All that rain is just going to flow off into something else, and you can have that effect down the line. Maybe someone puts another subdivision somewhere, and all that rain that used to get absorbed by the forest is now being spread out into other neighborhoods. I'm sure there are people around here that have problems where they may have put in a new subdivision, a new building, and all of a sudden you have a flooding event in your front yard that you didn't have before. Or maybe there isn't as much sewage or drainage allowed in the streets to keep the streets from flooding all the time when you have these big rain events. So that's something you really have to worry about. But the best news is along the rivers, there are a lot of these wildlife areas that have been preserved. So they actually help to absorb some of this excessive rainfall. Now here are high priority areas along I-75. We're going to zoom into a few spots here, and you'll see that east and west of I-75, each one of these subdivisions can have problems with flooding because of the way that they were designed or the way everything used to work before we had all this development. You have areas to the west of I-75, the Royal Oaks, Fort Clark Forest, Newberry Road back over there. You can see the amount of potential for flooding. And then you get closer to the hills of Santa Fe. Everybody's been out there on 78th where it just floods all the time. On the other side of I-75, where the Meadowbrook Golf Course is, where that floods in and think of what they had to do over there, where they had to put that permanent pumping station in to help pull away all of that water and dump it across the other road off of Newberry Road on the other side. Well, where's that water going to go? It's going to go someplace else. So you have to worry about these things. And it continues even on the east of I-75 up towards Heatherwood and Emerald Woods and Richmond. And so you're looking anywhere from 30 Newberry Road up to 39th. That's what 222 is right there. So this is the most vulnerable assets for urban areas, emergency infrastructure services, and residential commercial property. So these are all things that the county is going to have to work on over the next decade to 50 years to 100 years to figure out how we're going to build in certain places and how we're going to make sure that we have all of the land mass or properties built up high enough to withstand 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of floodwaters in those areas without having to rebuild everything or tear things down after they've been flooded so many times. So that's a big problem as far as potential building codes and so forth down the line for the county. Oh, this is just an assessment of the same kind of thing. I won't go into that too much. So here's ocean climate change. Warming temperatures, expanding ocean volume. So this is the ocean trends. You see where it's lighter blue, that means colder. So this is across the entire globe. You look where it's kind of the light pink up to a dark red. Those are areas that are changing heat content. In other words, how much energy is available within the ocean. So we're not talking about landmass here. This is just the ocean. 2/3 of the earth is covered with water. So you can see this right now. Look up towards the north. You say off in New England in south of Nova Scotia. Look how warm that trend was. That's from 1993 to 2022. So that doesn't even account for the last 2 years. And here's the expanding volume. So when you heat something, like if you took a pot of water and you had it at scientifically say 100 milliliters, and you warm it up, it's going to expand. Whenever you heat something, it expands, and that water is going to expand upwards. It's going to rise upwards. So this is a graph showing with that excessive heat, how much the water is going to rise. So we talk about sea level rise. That's where you get the sea level rise from. It's not generally from pressure events. It's from the actual warming of the water. So you see right here, expanding ocean volume because of the heat means sea level rise. Look at all these areas in darker blue. Remember, this is not a temperature map. This is actual rise in the heat. So we're looking at centimeters. So 20 centimeters up there in the central Pacific. And then look at the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. Look how much that's rising. Where do we sit? As far as the state goes, we sit right in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, in the Caribbean, and the Atlantic Ocean. If that rises up, what's going to happen to the coastline? It's going to flood. Here's a look at the sea level rise. So over the last 20 years, look how it's risen in the darker line there. We get up all the way from 2000 to 2020 to 2022. It's been expanding. Sea level rise has been expanding. Approximately 3-inch rise in 20 years. That's not from moon phases. That's not from wind. It's just from the expanding heat in the ocean causing a sea level rise. Now, there are some impacts from glacier melting or polar ice caps melting. That's also adding to the problem, but it's the expansion of that water from the heat. So here's a look at Cedar Key to bring it back to home. So I don't know if I have, oh, okay, we'll get to that. So we'll go from here. So this is a likely event of a forecast of Cedar Key sea level rise. We'll go with the lower probability. We go from now up to, say, 2050. This is in feet. So we'll go up 1 foot by 2050 at the lowest end, as much as 2 feet on the higher end. This is different computer models looking at this. But we go to 2100, we could go up, the high end is almost 8 feet, 7.5 to 8 feet for a rise in Cedar Key, 2100. Even on the low end, we're looking at 1.5 foot sea rise at Cedar Key in the next 75 years. What's gonna, now, you think about it now, when we have a tropical system come through there, and there's a little seawall at Cedar Key. I'm sure most of you have been out to Cedar Key. That seawall at high tide, that's gone. Those businesses are underwater. Just on a minor event, even a wintertime storm can cause major problems out there. You add another foot to that, the town's gone. You add 8 feet to that, well, we had, I think it was the last storm that came through there, there was a 10-foot storm surge. That pretty much has devastated Cedar Key last year, and they still have not yet recovered. Think about that if it's like that all the time with 8 feet more of water just sitting there 24/7, not just during a tropical event. And what's going to happen to that water down the line? Well, here's a look across north central Florida. Now, this is the mean water high level. In other words, what the average level is out there along the coastline. You can see Cedar Key is, I don't think the pointer actually, it's sitting right there. As we go in time, so go to 2050, we're looking at 1.3 foot rise. Now, this is just one computer model. And remember, the computer models have been wrong on the low side so far. If we expand it to one of those higher levels, we're looking at almost a 2-foot rise. So this is the lowest average we have. So that's by 2050, which isn't all that far off. Then we go to 2080, 3.4 feet of rise. So what kind of an impact can that have here? Well, a 3-foot rise would make it pretty much unlivable along the coastline. Not just there, but look at the East Coast. How many people live on, how many of those high rises and condos are right on the East Coast there? Well, these are the areas that are going to impact. Low impact here in areas a little bit higher, like in Clay County, and we have the Trail Ridge that builds up there in Putnam County. But you have a high impact even in parts of northern Dixie County because of the flooding, because all of that water is not going to be emptying out into the Gulf of Mexico, coming down the Santa Fe River or the Suwannee River. It's going to pile up and stay there. And what happens when all of these areas along the coast become unlivable? They have to come here to live. Not that this isn't a great place to live, but do you want to triple your population? Can you imagine what it's like to have students 24/7 instead of only 8 months out of the year? So the summary, climate is happening now. Climate change is happening now, regardless of how the politicians want to frame it. From a scientific view, it's happening. You can't ignore it. Well, you could ignore it, but it's not going to help you. The weather patterns are shifting, and now is the time for action. So here's the high probability events. Extreme temperatures likely impact all residents across Alachua County. High intensity rainfall, flooding and flash flooding increase content in the atmosphere. Warmer temperatures can cause some problems. We'll have to see how that works out. Lower probability event, average and rainfall. So when we put it over the average, it may be an average year, but remember, you may have extreme droughts or extreme rainfall events on either side, like we showed you back in 2017. And tropical system frequency, still uncertainty exists on how that's going to impact. There's been some studies that have said that because the warmer temperatures, the upper level atmosphere winds are too strong, so they shear a lot of these storms apart. So even though they have a lot broader expanse in their development, they may be, instead of a category 4, they may be a category 1 or 2, but the rainfall potential for those systems could be much higher. Think back, I think it was it Hurricane Allison? I can't remember which year that was, back in Houston, where it was just a tropical storm. It was the early 2000s, and it produced, I think, 45 or 50 inches of rain from a tropical storm that lasted 3 days. Can you imagine what 40 inches of rain would do to this town? So we are lucky here in North Central Florida, in Gainesville especially, because we're far enough from the coast that the wind impacts from a tropical system aren't quite as extensive. Even though they do have some impacts, it's the rainfall that does a lot of the damage here. So think about down the line, what are you going to do to help with the potential for affecting climate change? That's an important thing everybody should keep in their minds of what to do in the future. That's it. Any questions in the back?
Let me bring, where's the question?
Thank you. Brent Siegel. This is about rainfall and flooding. And I just got a thing from my insurance company reminding me that I don't have flood insurance, but probably a part of the city that's never flooded. But it seems like events like the horrible flood in Nashville,
Right.
and we live in a flat area. Where's the rain going to go if we get a whole lot? Is there any safe place in the city of Gainesville to not have flood insurance?
Well, You have to check with FEMA on flood insurance and flood maps, because they're the ones that calculate that. I'm not sure where your house sits. I live in an area that has a swamp off to the, I think it's the southwest of my home, but I'm high enough that I don't really have a flood threat where I am. We even built a pond in my backyard, so.
Well, yeah, but it seems like these are historical data, and the future looks it looks like we've never been there.
Looks like it's grim. We'll just see that. Oh, I think he was there. Sorry.
Kind of related to that. You see, we have had a record of rainfall, and we have made corrections and accommodations for that rainfall.
Mhm.
So there are dams, and then there are canals dug and so on. What's happening with the increased heat is that you get increased evaporation. There's more moisture, like you said. And where it condenses is basically changing.
Yeah.
So in California, you get drought because the rivers are going dry. And at the same time, you get flash floods in the big cities,
Right.
and the landslides caused by that. And I have no idea whether or not that is how does one address that?
That's where the urban planners come in. That they're supposed to figure this out as far as how down the line, if you're going to build another subdivision or build another building or have some kind of development here and there, how is that going to be affected down the line as far as rainfall events? Now, predicting rainfall is one of the hardest things you can do. It's like, I'm glad I never had to forecast snow. That is almost an impossibility. But rainfall events 20, 30 years down the line, because that's what community planners do. They're not just looking at next week. They have to look, 20, 30 years in the future, which that's a job which is very difficult. A lot of engineers get into that and put in their information to help bring up solutions. Now, is there going to be a different solution 10 years from now? Possibly. Is the weather going to change even more extreme? Possibly. So they have to kind of figure those out too. Yeah.
And on March, I'm interested in looking at this from the perspective of heat-related illnesses that are caused. The heat index is helpful, but with athletic trainers and in the athletic environment, they use the wet bulb globe temperature. And as a result, we've seen the Gators now practice indoors.
Yeah.
And have had to build facilities for that. And we see in the high schools, we see practices starting early in the morning instead of in the afternoon. Now, what sort of changes is the community going to make on a temporal basis, since the wet bulb globe temperature shows that when there's maximum solar radiation in the mid part of the day and minimum wind and so forth, that you have your highest incidence of heat-related illnesses. So how is the community going to adjust its daytime or nighttime work and play schedule?
That is beyond my expertise. I wish someone could come up with a device that you could wear as an athlete that would show some kind of indication of how either your body temperature or the amount of moisture you have available for yourself, if you're becoming dehydrated. If there was some kind of device that they could wear either in their helmets or on their pads, or maybe just a patch on their skin that you could see where all of a sudden it shows red, it'll say you have to sit down. Even working out inside, you're still going to cause some heat-related illnesses, but you just have to be careful. I mean, I think having practices in the morning is much better. I know it's difficult for the parents because they're going to have to get up early and get their kids to camp at 5 o'clock in the morning before school. And who wants to sit next to somebody that's been working out in a classroom, has been sitting out working out for 3 hours in the morning by the afternoon?
Hi, my name's Suzanne Byrne. What are some things that we can do as citizens, individuals, that contribute to this problem?
One thing that you can do, that I've done it at my house, is xeriscaping. So get rid of your lawns. I know that people that have lawn services, probably not the greatest way to put that, but making more of a natural vegetation in your homes, so you don't have to water them. So there's a problem with, you won't have to have water restrictions anymore because you're not using water for that. You'll be more water available for drinking or showering or whatever. But if you do a xeriscaping on your property to make it a more natural environment for the climate that we have, then that can help with water usage down the line. It also helps because you have more natural vegetation. It can create a little bit of a cooling area for natural environment. So that can be very helpful.
Yeah, one of the reasons we have so many more floods in Gainesville is because there's so much pavement compared to, in the past, the forests and the woodland,
Yeah.
the water would perk down into the ground, but now it flows off. So I think the county should charge they should charge a certain very large amount of money for each square foot of ground paved by developers.
I'm not going to get into a political discussion about what they should charge and what they should charge. I will say that the heat island effect is also a bit of an issue when you have too much pavement built in, like larger cities. You have temperature that rises from that. Globally, that is also an issue. But you have to remember, most of the earth is covered with water, and that water is absorbing that energy too. But the flooding potential for that, that's a problem for the city planners, and they have to decide how much traffic is going to flow through an area, how they're going to deal with the rainfall events coming through 10 to 20 inches at a time. Extreme events. That's where they had that one map we had where they're going to have some issues, because one thing is you have to worry about isn't just residential areas, but potential infrastructure for emergency services. So say after a large rainfall event and you have this massive flooding, what happens if the sheriff's office floods or the police station floods? How are they going to be able to help people if they can't get in and out? So that all has to be taken into account with all of their planning. But I do agree that's something they have to keep an eye on.
I'm Joy Soar. What is probably the primary destination which younger meteorologists are wanting to move to in the United States and Canada, just out of interest?
I mean, as far as jobs go, or like where
As well, as far as preferred for weather, the best locations to not be affected by these weather events.
Oh, well. Well, yeah, meteorologists, they want to go where the weather events are. They want, yeah, right, yes, yeah. And you see all these storm chasers out there. I've never done that. And people seem to enjoy it when they're doing it, but it's becoming more and more dangerous because there are so many storm chasers out there, and they actually have tours. You can go on tours in Oklahoma if you want to pay the money.
Well, here's the best place for my family to live.
I live here. I've lived here for 30 years. I'm not moving. So, yeah.
When they're just graduating, are they looking at the map and saying, oh my gosh, let's try to get a job in this area as the best place to be because of the effect of?
No, I think when you first start out in meteorology, you're trying to just get your foot in the door. If you, especially in television, it's very difficult. At least it used to be very difficult. And trying to get that first job is a step, and then you kind of work your way up. I was pretty lucky. I've only had 2 jobs in meteorology. I was one in Mississippi. I was there for 3 years, and then came here for 28 years. So I was I was abnormal in that sense, in other sense as well. But where I just stayed in the same area because I loved living here. I loved doing what I did. But, getting a little long in the tooth, I was like, okay, let somebody else do it.
A lot of people have been looking at weather events and they've said, Asheville, for example, that's a good place. We're not on the coast. We're not going to be affected as much by tornadoes. It's not a tornado hurricane area. And then all of a sudden we had this event there, and suddenly people are rethinking like maybe Asheville's not a primary destination. So that's kind of
Yeah, well, extreme weather events can have implications anywhere. I mean, that's the problem. You look at California with the wildfires that they had. The problem is they were in the middle of the rainy season. They hadn't had any rain for almost a year, and they were supposed to have rain well before that, so that should have tamped down the fire threat. But they're in an area that's a desert community anyway, so they're supposed to be dry, but they have wild swings in rainfall events, just like we do here with rainfall events or heat events. But the problem is everything is going to get more intense. So where they're going to move to is where they're going to move to, and how they're going to deal with it down the line. It's very individualized in how they're going to deal with it.
Yeah, Rolf Larson. I'm interested in hurricanes, and one of the interesting things to me seems that we manage to have all the hurricanes that get close to us kind of don't go past about 5 miles of outside this city. And I think we've been blessed with that. But I'm curious, if things get hotter, will that mean that the hurricanes get closer and closer to us and go over the top of us?
Yeah, I wish I had a picture, a graph of. You can go on. NOAA used to have a website where you could go to and look at the paths of past hurricanes, and it will show you how they came across north central Florida. We're just lucky we haven't seen any in the last 20 years. In the last 150 years, there's crisscross everywhere across north central Florida. Now, the strength of them can change. If you remember back in 2004, we had Hurricane Francis and Jean. We didn't actually have a hurricane. Neither one of those were hurricanes when they came here. They were category 3s when they came along the coastline near West Palm Beach. By the time they get up here, they were strong tropical storms. But it was more of a rainfall event. Now, we had a lot of wind damage, but the rainfall was 25 to 30 inches, I think, with those systems. So just because it doesn't slide directly across through Gainesville doesn't mean we're not going to see the impacts of it. If something like the ones that were along the coastline last year, they just scooted the coast and then went up into Taylor County, that caused some issues. Here we had a wind event, but all you had to do was go west of I-75, and it was wind and rain and flooding. When you went east of I-75, there were minimal effects. But if you're out the coastline on the East Coast, there was coastal flooding. So we're just lucky. It's going to come. I hate to say, but they're coming.
Hi, I'm Julie Onsbach. Do you have any information on fruit trees and other crops that need cold hours to produce?
I do not have that expertise, so I do know that they need a specific amount of cooling trend to create the proper budding environment for those plants. The problem is if you have too much cold air, if you get below 27 degrees, you freeze them so much, then you don't get a crop for that year. That was a problem in the past when the National Weather Service used to have a thing called a hard freeze warning. They've actually removed that. So now it's just a freeze warning. So everyone's in the same boat. I think people were getting confused between freeze warning and hard freeze warning. But a freeze warning, yeah, we definitely need that. But it's not just plants, but it's the actual pests, mosquitoes and other moths and other things that can cause some problems and ticks. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mindy. I live in Putnam County, right off a block or two from the St. Johns River. So I was particularly the rising sea levels, and I realize your intended audience is for people that live in Gainesville.
What are you doing here then?
If you would, please, I would appreciate it to maybe get a little bit of explanation, if you would, about what I might come to expect living so close to the St. Johns River.
Yeah, the problem with the St. Johns River, it's very tidal influenced. So high tide, low tide along the coast, because you remember it flows north. Well, if a system is coming in, we have a strong easterly wind for its tropical system coming in, or even a wintertime system, you have a strong easterly wind, that's going to back up the river. So it can't flow because the wind is pushing against it. So that causes a flooding event. The other problem you have is during a tropical system, you'll have the wind changing direction, pushing the river not backwards, but impeding its flow out into the Atlantic Ocean. So you get flooding from there. But then you add in 20 inches of rain around that. Well, that water that's being dumped into the river is also going to expand outward. So you have kind of a double effect of that, which is going to cause some problems down the line, you know, living near the river. How close do you live to the river? Okay. What's your elevation as far as do you ever see the? Mm-hmm.
Not flooded at my house.
Right. A lot of times on the St. Johns River, I think it's near Satsuma and other areas where there's big bends in the river. That's where your biggest threat of flooding is. Right along the river, they say near Palatka, that expands quite a bit in that area. So it's going to take a lot more water to rise to cause that bit of an issue right along the river in that part. But when you get near the big bends, that's where you're going to have a much greater threat of extensive flooding and probably an expanded flooding as well.
I have two short questions.
Okay.
Number one, it seems to me that the biggest issue we're dealing with here, or will be dealing with, is fire. But unlike where my daughter lives in LA, this is going to be ground fires. This is not going to be as much the ground fires as we've seen. And so my question is, do you feel like we're planning for the potential of fires as a major issue? As a tree city,
Right.
it's a major issue, and I'm just wondering about that. Secondly, as a former NOAA employee, I hate to see the dismantling of NOAA, the Weather Service. Do you think that will affect the information flow that you as a professional and others got, or will that be picked up by the private sector?
I think there's a misunderstanding on how the weather forecasting is done. All of that information from the National Weather Service is used by your local forecasters, even private forecasters use that information from NOAA, and then they put out their own forecasts. When I was doing it, I would sit there, I would use the information. I wouldn't take the National Weather Service forecast and just repeat it. You take that information, because we lived in an area where we had 3 different National Weather Service forecast areas. So we had Jacksonville, Tallahassee, and Tampa, encompassing our viewing area that we used. So we would have to take all that information and kind of parse it down to what's relevant for us. The problem is, I think some folks don't understand the weather forecasts don't come out of thin air. They come from computer models. And if you're changing the way computer models are being researched and used down the line and disseminating that information, it's going to be difficult. I think there's a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered down the line. As far as fire threat goes, I think the county is doing a good job. The Forest Service in the state is responsible for doing control burns, which I know a lot of people don't like they don't like the smoke from a controlled burn, but controlled burns are important to help with the health of the forest, but also the health of the environment around there, to keep fires from spreading like we had back in 1998. We haven't had an event like that since. We've had a few large blow-ups, I think, in Dixie County, mostly in a swampy area. I think it was Mallory Swamp, pretty much burnt down. And there were some homes that were affected there, but it hasn't been quite as widespread. One of the things that's an advantage here in north side of Florida is the flood control programs. It's a natural program. We don't have dikes and dams for the most part, except for Rodman Dam, but you'll see along the Swanee River, it's all natural flow. If you go in other parts of the country, in the Midwest, where they put in a lot of dams, like near St. Louis and along the Missouri and Mississippi River, there's a lot of dams and dikes and things that cause problems where they funnel the water from one place to another place, and it causes this massive flooding when you have heavy rainfall events. We're lucky we don't have that here for the most part. Urban planning is also something we're going to have to deal with that, but you know, a fire threat is something we're going to have to deal with down the line. And it's a very specific event. If we have extreme drought events, then they're going to have to keep their eye on the ball and make sure that everybody's ready for that just in case.
In the likely event that things are going to go faster with this climate change,
Right.
what wide-scale mitigation efforts do you think are most favorable or most positive or putting more hope in?
Well, I think one thing people have to plan for the future as far as development goes. You can see that out in California, where a lot of the homes that burnt in this last event they had out there were older homes that weren't upgraded to maybe modern standards. Of course, there are all sorts of regulations for that, but building to help sustain a sustainable environment, I think, is very important. So we're probably going to have to change the way we build and decide to build and where to build and how we're going to put in roads or not put in roads and have more natural mitigation as far as water absorption into wildlife areas like we have here in Alachua County. I wish the rest of the state would take a lesson from Alachua County as far as planning, as far as water mitigation goes. I think it would be very helpful, like the Sweetwater branch down there where that's a beautiful area. That's a natural spot to help with not just water mitigation, but water cleansing and helping before it gets into the Santa Fe.
Right. But more along the lines of like seeding the ocean or actually trying to reverse the effects or the climate change itself.
As far as what humans can do, it's use less energy because the CO2 is the riding factor in what's causing a lot of the climate change. And if we don't do something about how many cars we drive, how far we drive, how much we build, where we build, all that kind of thing, how much energy we're using, it's just going to add to the problem. So we have to decide as a global environment, not just Alachua County or the state of Florida, but I know it's difficult to understand, but everybody's in the same boat here. It's not just us, it's everybody. So if we don't all get together and decide we're going to do something about this, it's going to get a lot worse than what I showed, without a doubt. Thank you. Yeah, okay.